I'm sitting right on the edge of what would have been Caesarea's inner harbor. This is actually the dock, and because of the earthquake and of course all the years of the waves, it's filled in, but this would have been the ocean. And the boats, the inner harbor boats, would have docked here. The reason this is so significant is when you read in Acts 9 and verse 30, the first time we have a reference to this city, Caesarea, by the sea, Maritima, it says in Acts 9:30, when the brethren found out, they brought him down to Caesarea, right here, and sent him out to Tarsus. We're talking about the Apostle Paul. We're talking about Paul right after his conversion in chapter 9. And what we find is that Paul's life can be divided into three very almost equal segments. About 10 plus years of preparation. He went to Tarsus, where he lived about 7 years at home. Prior to that, he had about 2 to 3 years in Arabia, where he was personally trained by Christ. And then it's followed by 10 solid years of missionary journeys. Paul went on the first, on the second, and on the third missionary journey. And then about 10 years of confinement. Paul was in prison. Paul was waiting for trials. And so this spot where I'm sitting, this dock to the boats that would have taken Paul, first of all, to the northwest corner of the Mediterranean, Tarsus, where Paul was from, and then onward from there to Antioch, where he was trained by Barnabas, and then from there back to Jerusalem on all of his reports from his missionary journeys. So this dock always reminds me of the chronology the Lord gives for ministry. Most people, when they are zealous for the Lord, they just want to go right away. What's interesting is the greatest missionary of all time, the Apostle Paul, didn't go on his first missionary journey until he had trained more than a decade. In fact, some scholars, if you add together Antioch with Tarsus, with Arabia, would say he trained 14 years in his hometown, under the tutelage of Barnabas, and personally in seminary with the Lord Jesus Christ himself in Arabia, as Galatians 1 tells us. 14 years in order to serve 10. Paul's total missionary journey time, crisscrossing the ancient world, planting churches all the way from Jerusalem all the way to Spain, and some say even to Britain. 10 years, but after 14 years of preparation. But then what's interesting is Paul was willing to not give up hope, even though the next 10 years he spent waiting for trials, imprisoned, wearing chains, being in the praetorium that we just filmed over in Herod's palace. Paul always felt he was serving the Lord. He said that daily he was ministering by upholding the churches in prayer. And so I'd like to challenge you right here from the inner harbor of Caesarea Maritima, the spot right here where I'm sitting, where Paul would have gotten onto boats for each of his missionary journeys that he sailed out of here from. This is where he would land. This is where he met Philip, that he came to see in Acts 21. On this spot, Paul gives us a beautiful paradigm for ministry. Serve the Lord in whatever stage of life you're in. Whether you're in the preparation stage, Paul served the Lord in his hometown. Paul served the Lord under the tutelage of wiser, older Barnabas. Paul learned deeply of Christ in that intense seminary time in the Arabian desert, but prepare for ministry as much as possible. Secondly, serve the Lord with all your heart when you're free to do so. And Paul, for 10 years, crisscrossed the ancient world. And then finally, when you aren't in preparation, when you're not in active ministry, serve the Lord to the end. Those last 10 years of waiting were probably the hardest years of Paul's life. And you know what he says, and I'll read to you from Acts chapter 20. He talked about what he was facing, and he said, "But none of these things move me. Neither do I count my life dear unto myself, so that I may finish my race with joy." The Apostle Paul served God in every era of his life. In his early era of preparation, a decade of preparation. In his total sold-out ministry, a decade of missionary journeys. In his time of waiting, 10 long years imprisoned. Serve the Lord in any era of life. But the key is, finish the course. Finish the course. Run the race and do it with joy. That's what we learned from the inner harbor right here in Caesarea Maritima, land of the book, the life of Christ, as we look at why Jesus came. He came for us to serve him faithfully to the end.